20 million people used to play here. Now it's a ghost town.
When COD 4 won Game of the Year in 2007, it changed our first-person shooting games, our gaming franchises, our multiplayer games.
US Marines stationed on high alert were given the order to invade the small world.
One of the biggest gaming franchises in history. A series so unstoppable, not only does it still release a new title every year, but it continues to not just break, but decimate the records that it set. A series played by an estimated 300 million people worldwide, and a cornerstone of gaming culture. And for a lot of us, it all began with Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare. Before the release of the first Call of Duty back in 2003, one shooter reigned supreme. Medal of Honor, a joint venture between Steven Spielberg and DreamWorks Interactive, had brought the gritty World War II action of Saving Private Ryan onto home consoles, revolutionizing historical first-person shooters and proving the concept that realistic war-based shooters had a future. Following Medal of Honor's success on the original PlayStation in 1999, a number of sequels within the series were launched, with one of the best-selling and best received being Medal of Honor Allied Assault, released in 2002 on PC. It utilised graphics and technology not often seen before in shooters, using the advanced id Tech free engine to achieve scenes ripped straight from the war movies it was inspired by. Once again, Steven Spielberg was on board to co-write the Hollywood-esque story, and to tie it all together was an iconic score by Academy Award winner Michael Giacchino. Medal of Honor Allied Assault not only offered an unparalleled World War II gaming experience, but it proved that the genre was only growing, with the game selling over 1.9 million copies and achieving a more than respectable score of 91 on Metacritic. Following the release of Allied Assault, a number of developers decided to leave behind the Medal of Honor series. They had the idea of taking the World War II genre and adding even more realism and grit, with competent AI that would allow a game to achieve unparalleled simulation of 20th century warfare. This team called themselves Infinity Ward, and that game was the original Call of Duty. Using a modified version of the id Tech free engine they had mastered with Allied Assault, Infinity Ward created a game unlike any of its competitors. With a greater emphasis on squad-based playstyles and a new take on AI-controlled allies who would support the player as they advanced through the levels. On release, Call of Duty received critical acclaim and won multiple Game of the Year awards. Infinity Ward's gamble of leaving the Medal of Honor series had paid off, and they now had their own series that would one day not only dethrone Medal of Honor, but dominate over every other game series. Following the successful launch of a direct sequel in Call of Duty 2, Infinity Ward approached their publisher, Activision, with a concept. They wanted to use the mechanics that had proven lucrative with COD 1 and 2 and move them to a new era of history. The present.
This game has not yet been rated.
After working on 3 different World War II games, Infinity Ward were burnt out on the time period, feeling that they had told every story there was to be told. Proud of their new Golden Boys, Activision greenlit the project. While Infinity Ward would work on the new Modern Warfare game, Treyarch would be brought in to fill the gap in development, giving Infinity Ward an extra year to realise their new idea. The timing of Call of Duty 4's release cannot be understated. With over 6 years of a relentless barrage of World War II shooter after World War II shooter, it wasn't just Infinity Ward that was burnt out on that time period. Gamers were beginning to show signs of fatigue with playing the same soldiers in the same theatres of war. The stories could only tell so much when almost every player had already learnt the history the game is set within. And this was all proven true to Activision after the commercial failure of Call of Duty 3. Modern Warfare wasn't the first game to approach present-day warfare by any stretch. DICE had already proven that there was a gap in the market with Battlefield 2 in 2005, but it was COD 4's perfect timing 2 years later that helped to propel modern war-based games into the mainstream. Development was far from smooth, however. For the first 2 years of dev time, Infinity Ward had prioritized nailing the feel of battling in a modern war environment. The team attended live fire exercises with the Marine Corps, interviewed veterans on the emotions and attitudes seen by the Marines in active combat, and even recruited veterans to supervise the motion capture and artificial intelligence implementation into the game. But at the end of those 2 years, they still hadn't written a story that linked the variety of missions they had designed. Nor was there any semblance of a plot or narrative for a vast majority of the stages. Even multiplayer barely resembled the final project, instead more closely resembling the old school mode that was shipped with the final game, with weapon and killstreak pickups strewn across the maps, similar in some aspects to Halo. With 1 year left and the devs walking a tight line, they hired television writer Jesse Stern to help create the story, even pulling programmers from the multiplayer team to help complete the single player campaign in time. With the release date of November 5th, 2007 looming on the horizon, Infinity Ward were able to successfully complete the game with mere months to spare. In 2007, there was only one first-person shooter game the world cared about, and that was the wildly beloved Halo 3. Its campaign and multiplayer had cemented it as an instant classic, with the game dominating both sale charts and the Xbox Live Online service. Even with this knowledge, the tumultuous development happening behind closed doors at Infinity Ward, and the commercial failure of COD 3, Activision was still cocky leading up to the launch of Modern Warfare. They had predicted to sell even more copies than the highly successful Halo 3. And after the release, the predictions were correct. Not only did Modern Warfare fulfill the predictions, it actually beat Halo 3 sales on just the Xbox 360 alone. When combining sales from both the PS3 and PC, Call of Duty 4 went on to sell well over 15 million copies by 2013, and was announced as the best-selling game of the entirety of 2007, even beating the highly acclaimed Super Mario Galaxy that launched on the far more popular Nintendo Wii. The timing was impeccable. Next-gen graphics and technology combined with Modern Warfare tactics and a multiplayer mode featuring options and addictive gameplay never before seen. Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare was, for many, the first game that truly felt next-gen. The 7th generations of consoles were here, and they offered experiences never before seen. Unlike modern-day Call of Duties, the campaign of COD 4 was seen as its most important component. Multiplayer wasn't new to the series. Call of Duty 2's multiplayer even closely resembles COD 4's in some regards, but the multiplayer was never a main draw for the average consumer, instead being an additional mode you played around with after experiencing the main bulk of the game. The approach to Call of Duty 4 was no different. While multiplayer was important, it was strongly believed that the single-player campaign was what most people would play and remember the game by. It was this belief that brought us the cutscenes between levels.
Good news first, the world's in great shape. We've got a civil war in Russia, government loyalists against ultranationalist rebels, and 15,000 nukes at stake.
Just another day at the office.
Whereas previous titles ended with a simple debrief on the next level screen, COD 4 links each level one after the other, with no pauses in between, instead continuing the pacing and keeping a constant feeling of momentum. Each level leads into the next one, utilising cliffhangers and story beats that almost force the player to want to continue playing to know what happens next. This is the work of Jesse Stern. Having written for television, he knew better than anyone how to ensure someone tunes in to the next episode, or in this case, the next level. Momentum is the key word that continues to pop into mind when playing through COD 4, especially when you look at what content was cut to ensure it. You start with one of the shortest cutscenes in the game, even though it contains the most information with exposition on the current state of the world, a coup in the Middle East and a civil war in Russia. In just under 1 minute, the player has been given a quick breakdown of what is going on. Playing through the SAS training level, it is clear to see the amount of polish that 3 games worth of tutorials gives the development team. Whereas just 1 game earlier the tutorial is static and tiresome, in COD 4 it moves at a near breakneck speed. You're taught how to shoot, aim, switch to a secondary and melee attack in under 3 minutes, and all the while you're becoming acquainted with one of your new teammates. Gaz.
Nice. Your fruit killing skills are remarkable.
Next, you are sent to meet your captain. Notice that at no point are you taught how to use grenades. The area exists, and even fully returned in the remaster, but it is cut from the original release. It is clear that an executive decision was made to maintain a constant momentum, so the slow and precise grenade section had to go, instead relying on a player's intuition to learn how to effectively use them. Upon meeting Captain Price, he proceeds to insult the player.
Right. What the hell kind of name is Soap, eh? How'd a muppet like you pass selection?
This gives an insight into his sense of humour, but also initiates the player into the fold. Price isn't just an official you meet momentarily as with previous titles. He is your leader that you will grow to respect and admire. Already, you have established relationships with your captain in Price and your equal in Gaz. From a modern perspective, these relationships may feel shallow, but for 2007, not many games outside of RPGs had approached shooters this way. Infinity Ward were clearly taking a page out of Valve's book here. It goes to show how successful they were when multiple people will say how Gaz is one of their favourite characters, when he only existed for a total of 4 hours of game time across the entire series. Next, you run the CQB. Again, momentum is key, in this case quite literally, with the player being timed and compared to various skill levels. This tutorial section not only gives the player all the necessary information regarding controlling the game, but also teaches them how to play the game, with smart decision making and fast reflexes. Before we can even catch our breath, we find ourselves thrown into our first operation, infiltrating a Russian cargo ship based on intel from an informative. The skills learnt in the CQB are put to the test instantly, with Price and Gaz accompanying the player through the ship. Once we find our objective, the stakes are immediately pushed to the maximum. Nuclear weapons are now in play. No one has to be told about the danger of nukes. Upon hearing the word, many minds go straight to Cold War era footage of huge explosions isolated in the desert. If Infinity Ward wanted to make a clear distinction from their previous games, using the most dangerous weapon the world has ever seen is certainly one way to do it. Just as we believe the mission is done and will soon fade to black, the ship is attacked without warning, causing an escape sequence that would get anyone's heart racing. A near-death encounter, followed by a scene to further grow the player's relationship with Price. Finished off with a race to safety. In just 15 minutes, Call of Duty 4 has set the precedent for all games to come. The pace and ramp up from stealth to action to high stakes and finally to a daring escape makes this level a masterclass in how to get a player invested in your game. I don't know a single person who played Crew Expendable and didn't end the level excited. You promptly want to jump into the next level to keep the unstoppable energy flowing, and instead in a bold move, they grind it to an instant halt. We've already been told there was a coup in the Middle East just 20 minutes earlier, but let's be honest, how many of us have already forgotten that information? If Infinity Ward want the player to support the US Marines side of the story, they need to better introduce that side. And now that they know the player is at the edge of their seat raring for more action, they have the perfect opportunity to do so. The coup is as ballsy as a level as can be expected from the team that went on to create that airport level. We find ourselves beaten and placed in the back of a car with an ominous character looking back at us with disgust. We know this guy must be a main character because he doesn't look like all the other generic NPCs, but there's more to it than that. He looks at you loathingly on multiple occasions, takes phone calls in the middle of a coup, and gives directions. Infinity Ward want you to remember him, whether you know it yet or not. Driving through the streets, we see massacre after massacre, with innocent people being executed by an unknown militia. And over the tannoys we hear Al-Assad lay down his fundamentals behind the coup. Before the player can work out what is happening, we're introduced to our main two enemies, and then in a heart-stopping moment, executed live on television. When I played this game back in 2007, this scene left a lump in my throat. As a teenager, I had barely even thought about dying, never mind having a gun pointed to my face. It's this reaction of fear, disgust, and then anger that Infinity Ward wanted the player to feel. The player now has as much reason as any to fully be behind the US Marines' decision to invade this unknown Middle Eastern country, all with one goal: to capture Al-Assad. Before we take part in that US invasion, however, the SAS have one more mission to tie up the intelligence they received from the cargo ship operation. Act 1 begins with the SAS team's informant having been captured by the ultra-nationalist Russians, a far-right dissident group fighting the established Russian government for control of the country. As you move through the Russian wilderness, the player is introduced to basic stealth gameplay, with the option to quietly dispose of enemy units without rousing suspicion. A clear juxtaposition of the soon-to-come American missions. The SAS aid the loyalist Russians in their civil war and progress onwards to save their informant.
It's him.
Nikolai, are you alright? Can you walk?
Yes, I can still fight. Thank you.
As the team begin their extraction, the informant, Nikolai, makes a damning suggestion. America is making a mistake. These words will come to be very important, but before the player can even dwell on those words, we are instantly sent to the Middle East with electric guitars blaring. The comparisons with the original Desert Storm invasion of 1991 are clear to see. The speed of that conflict marries perfectly with the established doctrine of momentum in this game. In under 24 hours, the US Marines are in a full-blown invasion. We speed across the ocean with a legion of helicopters, surrounded by our allies as we advance on the objective. Whereas the SAS missions focus on stealth, smart tactics, and a sense of David vs Goliath, the US missions display the complete antithesis of this playstyle. Instead, we are given the full tour de force of the capabilities of the richest military on the planet. The nationalistic, even overzealous nature of the US missions is almost palpable, with rock music blaring during cutscenes and an overly calm and confident demeanor in the troops' reactions to the combat around them. The US missions more closely resemble the missions from the previous Call of Duty titles, full-blown warfare against a huge force of enemies. Vehicles accompany the player as they fight alongside a myriad of AI teammates, given a sense of scale that rivals the battles of the European theatre in the earlier games. The juxtaposition of the SAS and the Marines continues as the player jumps back and forth between the two conflicts. Following an ultra-nationalist retaliation, the SAS forces find themselves stranded deep behind enemy lines. Against all odds, the player must advance through a series of houses and farmland, avoiding helicopters and an army worth of militia. If it wasn't for the already established narrative of the elite training the SAS have gone through, the odds here would be laughable. Yet, even against implausible numbers, this stage manages to remain tense and believable. Momentum continues to be important. It is clear that this isn't a winning battle. Instead, the team must advance as fast as they can in an attempt to receive another extraction. As the tension mounts, the player meets an obstacle even the SAS cannot overcome. And then... I won't be the first to say this. Hell, one of my favourite YouTubers established his entire channel on this description, but Death from Above stands out as one of the eeriest levels ever placed in an action-packed FPS. Infinity Ward have managed to accidentally create an experience that truly displays the horror that modern 21st century warfare brings. Not because of how it looks or sounds, but how both of these aspects make you feel. In 2007, I'm sure many of us were in our formative teenage years as we played through the game for the first time. When I first played Death from Above, my takeaway wasn't how realistic it portrayed the real life footage, how it perfectly displayed the harrowing disillusionment the pilots presented to the murder of another living being, or how destructive the weapons I was so freely using were. Instead, I felt fucking awesome. The godlike power I felt when I could rain down 15 kilograms of explosives at a time, blowing away hundreds of bad guys, flattening buildings and destroying an entire junkyard full of highly flammable vehicles was empowering as hell. My adolescent mind was hyped. The power trip one goes through felt unlike anything else offered by any game previous to this. I even chuckled at the pilots and co-gunners' quips. And what makes that reaction even more appropriate is that this is exactly what the developers intended.
There's a wave, where's a wave? Hot damn. AC-130 level is not a trick, it's an actual game level, where you're flying above real-world geometry. If you were to fall out of that plane, you would fall to the ground. I mean, everything's there. There's real AI down on the ground reacting to what's going on. It's a really exciting level.
They also thought that this was one of the coolest levels in the game, which in retrospect is the most ironic part of this level. In their excitement to create a one-to-one simulation of real-life AC-130 footage, Infinity Ward actually created an experience that to an older, more mature user is almost sickening if you truly think about the destructive power and disillusionment remote warfare through a TV screen offers. they managed to inadvertently create a level that is both pro and anti-war depending on the individual playing it. Now, I'm not saying that thinking this level is awesome is somehow morally wrong, but to be able to kill a virtual being in almost the exact way a real life person has and can is certainly chilling if you think about it too much. Especially when you consider that such a disturbing experience was likely added in as a means to simply break up the pacing.
Yeah, good kill. I see lots of little pieces down there.
With the SAS safely escorted to their second extraction, we switch back over to the American side. The player mans an overpowered helicopter-mounted grenade launcher, once more displaying the clear technological superiority over the local militia. By this point, the player has been sent on a carefully cultivated power trip. Even when we are given news that a nuclear blast is imminent, it still doesn't feel like a threat. The rock music is playing and we're in a helicopter. What can go wrong? Even when we have to save a fallen comrade, it is done with an audacious level of contempt for the nuclear threat. None of the characters in game nor the player really take in the gravity of the situation as strongly as they should. Once the fallen captain is saved, we lift off with celebratory music. Our mission is done and we're getting out of there in safety. Throughout the power trip, at no point did anyone believe that the outcome would be as deadly as it was.
Everyone hang on!
And this brings the player crashing back to reality. Not only is the enemy desperate enough to use nuclear weapons, but they used it on their own population. Aftermath is an important level for the same reasons that the coup was. It brings the action to a grinding halt, giving the player a moment to reflect on what is really happening. This scene is likely the one that sticks in the mind of most people when they think of COD 4. It's the reason why every Call of Duty since seemed to think it was necessary to try and one-up the previous one with more and more absurd terrorist attacks. And yet, its original implementation in Modern Warfare remains perfect. Horrible enough to be remembered, but not outrageous enough to become almost laughable in retrospect. With the American campaign prematurely ended, Act 2 focuses solely on the exploits of Captain Price's team of grizzled SAS operatives. With new information from Nikolai, the team storm a small town in Azerbaijan in search of Al-Assad. Once the village is cleared out and a few illegal interrogation acts are performed, so enters our next villain.
Zakhaev. Imran Zakhaev.
Imran Zakhaev. A villain unlike any other in first-person shooters in 2007, and that's not only because he was dreamt up by the marketing team. He is no secret to the player by this point. We've heard his voice in the intro cutscene, even seen him during the execution in the coup. But unlike Al-Assad, he's much more indelible. Whether it's his missing arm, worn features, or gravelly iconic voice, his limited on-screen time doesn't detract from his memorability. The player only sees Zakhaev on 3 occasions for a few minutes, and yet his presence over the entirety of the game, along with its 2 sequels, remains undeniable. With the main villain introduced, the story diverts into a flashback to help introduce Zakhaev's overall importance to the plot as an arms dealer who made his fortune trading in uranium left over from the Chernobyl disaster. All Gillied Up is a masterclass in what the talents of a motivated team working on their dream project can achieve. Largely developed by just one designer, Mohammed Alavi, he began designing the level based on a pitch given to him.
You're in a clearing, and you walk up to this bush that's nestled between these 2 trees, and there's 2 enemies on the other side of that clearing. You bring your gun up and you're about to aim at them, and the bush turns towards you and says, "Hold up." And I'm like, I'm sold. I was like, that's all I needed. It was that moment where like the bush turned toward me and spoke to me, and I was like, I've got it. I've got the level.
With over 10,000 lines of AI code that he had to write himself, Alavi successfully designed the first 2 minutes of the level, and after astounding praise from higher ups, the level was greenlit, and one of the best stealth missions in a first-person shooter was born. All Gillied Up remains a fan favourite for its replayability. In a game where you go from A to B, completing the same objective over and over with little divulgence given to the player, All Gillied Up offers an experience that allows a lot more freedom. Whether you want to follow stealthy avoidance, act more like a deadly assassin, or going guns blazing is completely up to you. However, some options are clearly better than others. A level where you can follow the exact orders of your commander, or create your own routes, is a breath of fresh air following the relentless combat offered so far. Pripyat as a location acts as the foolproof backdrop to elite snipers, overgrown fields, abandoned buildings, and a region left by humanity to be reclaimed by nature. The ghillie suit is at home in this environment, and nothing screams recognisable like Reactor 4 and the Ferris wheel. Icons of the Cold War era, pictures burned into the retina of all those who have seen it, as if done by the radiation itself. There's a reason why marketing showed off this scene as much as they could. They knew that it set the tone for the game in a mere instant. This is the perfect time to discuss the Modern Warfare soundtrack. Every strong piece of media needs strong audio to carry it, and this game is no exception. While the main theme was written by the noted music composer Harry Gregson Williams, the rest of the game's soundtrack lends its creation to a much lesser known individual. As his first video game soundtrack, Stephen Barton brings a powerful score. American levels are strong in their delivery, with dominant and energetic drum beats maintaining a steady momentum. Electric instruments and Middle Eastern motifs are subtly implemented to give an appropriate exotic tone to the tracks. In juxtaposition, the SAS tracks are instead more orchestral, calm and collected, darker in tone with slow, bassy drums to keep a steady tension in the air. As combat breaks out, horns and strings rise in symphony with the player's heart rate. Looking at his recent portfolio with the likes of Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order and Apex Legends, it's clear to see that Barton is more than just a talented composer, showing that the risk Infinity Ward took in hiring such an underexperienced composer truly paid off in hindsight. He has created a soundtrack that not only faultlessly complements the gameplay, but adds to the tone of the game as a whole. One shot, one kill gives players a sniping experience that once again innovates and offers a style of gameplay that was not yet capitalized on within the gaming landscape. Realistic shooters existed, sure, as many a Battlefield fan may tell you, but how many of those games made the player account for the Coriolis effect? In presenting a realistic view of how sniping at such an immense distance may play out, Infinity Ward have once again created an iconic scene. Let me just make that clear once again, in a little under 4 hours of gameplay, we have already had 6 iconic events. No other game can claim to even come close to such a condensed volume of memorable gameplay moments, and we're only 2/3 of the way through. After successfully removing Sakeyev's arm, it's time for our escape. Here, the classic Call of Duty blockbuster events start to rear their head. We've already had big explosions, heart-stopping moments and exhilarating fast-paced scenes, but it's in one shot, one kill that the action-packed Hollywood feeling that is now synonymous with the COD series starts to show. This set piece makes the player feel like they're in a Mission Impossible movie, thrills are put as high as they can be, and yet the newer Call of Duties have continued to one-up this, to seemingly hilarious levels in how over the top it has become. Akin to comparing the first Fast and Furious to the latest one, it's clear to see where the series began somewhat grounded and has now gone completely nuts. This isn't to say COD 4 is realistic, but it is at least believable, and that really helps in keeping the player invested. The worst thing a game can do is suck a player out of the experience by being too crazy for even the biggest fan to accept as possible. The level ends with a standoff under the historic Ferris wheel. The stakes are high, with the player being stretched to the absolute limit until their rescue arrives just in time. Even when being stationary, the momentum of COD 4 remains at the forefront as we fight tooth and nail, staring at the countdown clock in agonizing anticipation while you fight off horde after horde of Russian forces. Tension and relief. Much like most people's favourite solo activity, it keeps the player addicted to the thrills that each level brings, raising the player's blood pressure to alarming levels and then dropping it down. As a teenager, there were only 2 endeavours that could do this, and COD 4 was one of them. With the flashback over, we return to modern day Azerbaijan. The Russian ultranationalists are encroaching on Al-Assad's safe house, and now a small team of SAS specialists have to fight their way up through the town, slowing the enemy's advance. When finally reaching the extraction zone at the farmhouse, we find our extraction helicopter cannot land so close to the war zone, forcing the player to have to fight their way through the enemy line and run all the way back down through the village. As far as levels go, this one is one of the few in COD 4 that feels like filler. While it offers some great gameplay moments, namely using the minigun and the friendly air support, from a story standpoint, it doesn't hold much prominence compared to the rest of the game. This is especially apparent when the entire level reuses the exact same location as earlier, even ending where that level started. While this can be seen as criticism, the fact that actually playing the level remains as exhilarating as any other stage in the game, and even more so when the player has to race their way back down through the village, is a true testament to how fun this campaign is. With the US and SAS teams united, we see the first combined forces mission in the game, and the beginnings of the famed Task Force 141 for Modern Warfare 2. The Sins of the Father reintroduces us to Viktor Zakhaev, son of Imran, who we first saw back in the coup, the third horseman out of the game's main 4 enemies. The team have been tasked with capturing him to be questioned about the whereabouts of his father. Once again, momentum becomes the main driving force. Capturing Viktor is imperative to locating Imran, and without him, the team will be helpless in preventing Imran from progressing his plan. With the stakes placed high, an ambush is set. As is to be expected by this point in the campaign, not all goes to plan, and Viktor thwarts the team's ambush. As the mission changes from ambush to chase, and the player must follow Viktor through a town filled with Soviet-era architecture. Unlike many other missions where being pinned down by enemies generally results in a cover-based shootout with each side slowly whittling down each other, here the pace is kept high. While enemies will try to corner the player into those gunfights, the constant barrage of orders from Price, along with a slightly more aggressive friendly AI and the aid of some helicopter support, ensure that the player is never bogged down for too long, instead keeping the chase going, with Viktor almost always being in sight as you run and gun towards him. When the team finally corner him, however, he takes his own life to preserve his father's secrets.
Shit, kid's got some issues.
Faceplate, this is Bravo 6. Zakhaev's son's dead. We're coming up.
Our so-called leaders prostituted us to the West, destroyed our culture, our economies, our honor. Our blood has been spilled on our soil. My blood on their hands.
Undoubtedly one of the most iconic video game speeches from the 2000s. Unlike pretty much everything else in this story, this is one of the few pieces of dialogue in the game not written by Jesse Stern. Instead, the entire speech, including the choice of voice actor, was by the advertising agency The Ant Farm, who won multiple marketing awards for their trailers for games and movies alike. Even the iconic opening line from Macmillan was written by them. With Zakhaev's endgame plan set in motion, we immediately find ourselves cut off from Griggs and set a plan in motion to recover our fallen comrade. Upon finding the house he is holed up in, we hear Griggs falling back onto his US military training and giving nothing of use to his interrogators.
Griggs, 678-452056.
Floor clear. Proceed upstairs.
With the team reunited, our new objective is to make the entry into the heavily guarded nuclear base a little bit easier.
So, do it. Charlie 6, the tower's down and the power's out. 20 seconds.
After shutting off the main power, we press on to aid with the infiltration, coming into contact with and joining a small band of snipers. This addition of new comrades helps to make this operation feel as grand and important as it should. A madman is on the loose with some of the deadliest weapons ever invented, so the increased allied firepower helps to sell how high the stakes are, and then they become a whole lot higher.
We got a problem here. Delta 1 X-ray, we have a missile launch. I repeat, we have a missile. There's another one. Delta 1 X-ray, we have 2 missiles in the air.
To help really sell the third act and keep the player invested for those last few missions, I really can't think of what else Infinity Ward could do but have the enemy directly threaten the US. The motive for stopping a madman is a good one, but adding the lives of millions of innocent civilians on top of that certainly helps to keep the tensions up. The final missions are set in place, and they are some of the most difficult. I haven't mentioned Call of Duty 4's in-game difficulty since the tutorial, and that's because as long as you're playing at a difficulty level that truly challenges you, the game so far isn't too hard. With smart decision making and tactics, most of the game can be completed with little hassle, although some deaths are expected, but these help to train the player to overcome them, yet these last missions are taking the piss. I made a point earlier about how the story manages to keep itself grounded and believable to some degree in how overwhelming the battle can sometimes be, but here, it's simply too much. Yes, we have a combined task force of the world's best special forces operatives, but we're fighting a legitimate army with multiple RPGs and explosives being tossed our way over and over, and all this with the inclusion of not 1, but 2 enemy tanks. Any illusion of believability at this point is completely removed. Even on regular difficulty, I found myself having to fall back and rely on the Wolverine healer mechanic a little bit more than I anticipated. Of course, the obvious reply here is to get good, and you're probably right, but I feel the difficulty curve right at the end, while understandable from a gameplay aspect to challenge the player, simply detracts from the story with the sheer frustration of it all. With that said, after completing the game on Veteran, I can finally say that I can understand why it was made this way, and it all boils down to the 2 points I have consistently made throughout this video: momentum and tension followed by relief. The momentum, unlike in the rest of the game, is ground to a halt as the desperation of the team's efforts gets stronger and stronger. A countdown is given for the untimely deaths of millions, and we have to defiantly fight tooth and nail, inch by inch, through an unrelenting onslaught of enemies. This almost entire 180 of the otherwise fast-paced nature of the game, until these final missions, helps to raise the tension, which can be difficult to do when it is a tactic they used multiple times through the campaign already. And this all accumulates to the final relief we receive when deactivating the ICBM mid-flight and winning the day. If this were a Hollywood movie, the credits would have begun playing now. However, much like at the end of Act 1, Infinity Ward aren't finished with us yet. We begin our escape. What should be a simple enough getaway suddenly becomes sour with the entrance of an enemy helicopter. Giving the player an RPG here was actually an ingenious move by the dev team, as it builds on the ever-growing cockiness within the player. By overcoming every obstacle put in front of us so far, we're now confident in our abilities, and we've already won, so of course we're going to be able to take down this helicopter, even if in hindsight that is obviously an impossible task from the back of a moving truck. I actually remember replaying this single mission multiple times in hopes of some alternate ending that would be unlocked had we been able to take down the helicopter. But unfortunately, it wasn't to be.
The bloody truck! The bridge isn't gonna hold! Move, move, move!
Even with the escape looking less and less likely, we hear hope of Kamarov coming to the rescue. The final battle actually goes in our favour. Our last few men are successfully repelling the ultra-nationalist remnants, and we need only hold out a little longer. After every crazy event in this campaign, soon it will all be over with a victory for the good guys. Of course, we know this isn't how it ends. This final cutscene is the one that spawned hundreds of online threads and conversations in 2007. Many a game and conspiracy theory can trace themselves to this segment, some even with questions that, to this day, were never completely answered. We see Griggs gunned down and Gaz executed. We already had every intention needed to kill Zakhaev, but it is this last slight that ensures we finish the job for good. A wounded Price slides us his trusty 1911, and we pull the trigger. With a final cliffhanger of Price's uncertain future, the game ends with a succinct ending cutscene.
The Russian government released a statement today confirming a series of nuclear missile tests in central Russia. Although world leaders were quick to denounce the action, Russian officials maintain that the missile tests fell well within established UN protocols. No comment was received from the ultra-nationalist party, where rumors of a possible leadership struggle have just begun to surface. In other news, the search for a ship lost in the Bering Strait due to a major storm has been called off.
Everything we did has been covered up. Soap, Gaz, Price and Griggs won't enter the history books, but we can be happy in the knowledge that it was us that saved the world. As the credits play, there are two final sign-offs that truly make one realise the utter passion put into this game. The first being the song by Griggs.
In time you'll find my lines combining the twine, underline, rhyme divine. No Heim, you go against me, 249, lift you swiftly. Front lines in it with me, think I'm lying, come and get me hot.
Infinity Ward didn't need to include a rap song at the end of the campaign. No one expected it, and yet they still went and did it because it was something they wanted to do, something they had a passion to do. It really helps highlight how they went above and beyond with every step of this game to ensure they had created an experience they could be proud of. The second sign-off is of course Mile High Club.
We're going deep and we're going hard. Surely you can't be serious. I'm serious, and don't call me Shirley.
I touched on this game's less than smooth development near the beginning of this video. Mile High Club is the last clear remnant of that time. Before hiring Stern to help give the game any semblance of a plot, each level was simply designed in its own ecosystem. The devs came up with a cool idea, and then they created it. Mile High Club is one of the missions that simply didn't fit into the plot, and so it doesn't exist within it, instead standing on its own, as an unrelated epilogue of sorts. Again, there was no additional benefit in polishing a level that wasn't necessary for the game, and yet they did it anyway. In the modern world of AAA game development, this is sadly a rare sight to see. When dev teams are pushed to their limit and constrained by budget, the passion can slowly be lost. As was seen in Infinity Ward themselves, when nearly the entire team handed in their resignations after the release of Modern Warfare 2, claiming Activision's overly heavy hand as the main reason. I've gushed endlessly over how great I think this campaign is, but that means nothing if no one agrees. But you need only look at any first-person shooter after 2007 to see that the gaming world took notice of Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare. The frenzy around this game can be single-handedly attributed to the onslaught of Modern Warfare-based games that we would see enter the market in the 2010s. Whether it be Battlefield 3, Homefront, Spec Ops, or any number of cash grab bargain bin mobile game, the Modern Warfare theme was now the go-to shooter theme, until even the Call of Duty series itself would suffer from the customer's frustration with the era. In trying to escape the oversaturated time period of World War II, Infinity Ward ironically created a new one. But the impact doesn't just end there. There is a clear switch in shooters post-2002 when it comes to controls too. Call of Duty didn't invent the control scheme it uses, but it did help standardize it. Pick any shooter that isn't Halo in the last 10 years, and you can be sure that X or square will be reload, Y or triangle will be switch weapons, and the analog sticks will control sprint and melee. Finally comes the importance of a plot in first-person shooters at all. Many shooters at the time were turned into an online-only formula, and while that trend continues to this day, many games released with campaigns when they simply didn't need one. But where the best lasting impact can be seen is in Infinity Ward's spiritual successors of Titanfall 2 and the newest Modern Warfare 2019. Titanfall 2 by Respawn Entertainment, which itself is a team made up of many ex-Infinity Ward members, has an excellent fast-paced campaign as original and enjoyable to play as COD 4, proving that not only does this classic dev team still have what it takes to make a great game, but they have only gotten better in time. With the new Infinity Ward's 2019 remake, we see a game created using the same principles that inspired the game it was rebooting. The importance of innovative and creative mission design was put over the importance of plot, ensuring that a good game was made first and a story made second. But you know what's ironic about all this, and even this video in general, is that Call of Duty 4's campaign isn't even the most important legacy that this game left behind. But that is a story for another time. This video took far too long to make. Between the exciting growth of my channel in the recent days and doubts about my own abilities as a content creator, this video proved to be a difficult learning point. It's challenged me in all aspects of video creation, from script writing to editing, but I released this video confident that I have created a product I'm proud of. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for 250 subscribers. Next time, I'll be covering a game that is finally, after 17 years, receiving a well-deserved remaster.